Hi, I'm Nicole Kemper. I'm a writer, filmmaker, and actor living in Atlanta, Georgia. This is 50 Foot Woman, and I've committed to shooting at least one roll of Super 8 film per month. Today we're going to be color grading the black and white footage that I shot on my Bell & Howell 431. I did a video from the last challenge where I went a little bit more deeply into my process for color grading. And of course, this footage is in black and white. So does that mean that we do our process differently, or do we think about different things? Yeah, a little bit. So of course, we're not dealing with the same color spectrum that we are dealing with when we're color grading color negative film, but I think my process is probably going to be pretty similar. So I am going to be focusing obviously more deeply on luminance because we're going to be working more on the exposure. As far as like hue and saturation goes, those things we're probably going to spend less time on, but I'm interested to see as we adjust the exposure for this black and white footage, are we then going to see any kind of color cast? And a color cast is when there is sort of an unwanted sort of tint to your footage. And so maybe you've gotten some film back and noticed like, oh wow, like this, when I look at this, everything kind of has this sort of green tint to it. Or maybe you've shot some tungsten balance footage, which is for indoor. Maybe you've shot that outdoors and then you get your footage back and you didn't put a filter on it and you're like, wow, my footage is kind of blue. That would be a color cast. So we'll see. We're gonna play around with the exposure and see if any kind of color cast emerges. But of course, with this black and white footage, mainly what we're looking at creatively is, exposure wise, what's going on in the highlights and the shadows, how bright am I making the midtones, how much contrast am I going to play around with in this image. And so that's going to be like our main thing that we're thinking about when we're color grading this black and white. All right, so we're going to get right into color grading this black and white negative footage, and I'm going to just walk you through my process. All right, so I thought I'd start with my process for getting the footage from Premiere into DaVinci. Of course, you can always start in DaVinci, send it to Premiere, send it back to DaVinci. It's really up to you. Just for my workflow and all these videos that I'm doing, because a lot of the footage, of course, I'm editing in Premiere. I'm bringing the Blackmagic stuff directly in to Premiere. So for me, the workflow just makes sense to start in Premiere, send it over to DaVinci to color grade it, and then send it back. All right, so I've got a sequence here. I've called it challenge number 3, ungraded. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a XML, which is a special type of file that you can send sequences from one editing platform to another editing platform. So I am going to export an XML. Now it does say Final Cut Pro XML. Don't pay that no mind. You can send that XML to any software. You can send it to DaVinci. You can send it to Final Cut Pro. You can send it to Avid Media Composer. Doesn't really matter. You can send it to any one of those. So I'll create a folder for color grading right next to where the original footage is. For me, that just makes sense. And of course, I've named this sequence Challenge 3 Black and White Ungraded, and then the sequence in DaVinci, I will call that Challenge 3 Black and White Graded. So I've already got DaVinci open. I've got like sort of a master DaVinci file for all of the Super 8 footage that I'm color grading for this particular video series. And I'm just gonna pull in that XML and it's gonna create a whole timeline with that footage in it. So I'm gonna go, I'm just gonna kind of go to my media pool or my media tab here, right click, go to timelines, import, and then I'm going to import from an XML. And I'm just going to grab that XML that I just exported out of Premiere. Again, I am going to change the timeline name to graded so that when it goes back to Premiere, I know what it is. And then I would recommend that you just have all of the settings for that that timeline in DaVinci, just have them match the ones in Premiere. Otherwise, you might have some problems when you send it back. Okay, let's get into doing a little bit of color work here. Of course, I'm not gonna crop or anything. We can do that later. We're dealing with something a lot more simple in the sense that we don't really have it's not color footage, so we're not looking at as much of the hue and saturation, although certainly we'll see if anything, any kind of color cast pops out as we start adjusting the exposure. But I'm going to go with my usual MO, which is to create a node and just for exposure, and we'll just start there. So I've started with this shot of my friend Julie, and so we're just going to get in here and play around with the exposure. It's looking pretty good already, but we could be doing better. So I'm going to just adjust the gains. We get a little bit more in the highlights. We don't want to I don't like to bump up all the way to the top, but we'll get a little bit more here in the shadows. I think I might pull this in a little bit. And actually what I'm feeling like is what I want to do is maybe adjust the exposure next and maybe come back. Sorry, the contrast, and then come back to the exposure. So, and I'm just kind of feeling my way through this. I usually work, I mean, I've certainly worked with black and white footage before, but not really as much. Well, no, I did work with some black and white footage in college on film, but it's been a while. Usually in the past, typically when I'm working in Super 8, I'm usually shooting with color negative film. So let's see what happens if we just pump up the contrast a bit. Here we go. We don't want to make it too contrasty because we're not trying to make it, I think a lot of contrast implies a lot of drama, and I'm just going to go back to the exposure and adjust the midtones a bit, just pump up the midtones a bit. Maybe adjust the shadows. So let's see how that's affecting things. Okay. See how that contrast is affecting things. Yeah, getting a little bit more there. Pretty happy with that. And of course, I did move the camera, so we want to also take a look at this. I think we could maybe pump a bit more into the highlights. Maybe I'll do that here. Make a new node for that. There's no reason why we can't. We could also make a cut here. Maybe do a little cross dissolve, but since the camera's moving, if we wanted to, we could always make a cut from the face, in between the face as the camera's moving, and then do a cross dissolve to blend that color grading. We might have to do that, we'll see. I'm just going to pump the highlights up a bit. Maybe pump up the midtones, because we don't want, again, we don't want this to be too moody. So let's see here. Okay, I feel like we definitely got a lot more detail, got a lot more going on here with the sort of the latitude, the difference between light and shadow. I'm pretty happy with that. And again, as we're adding, as we're pulling things up in the exposure, we are going to see some changes to the amount of grain that we're seeing. That's just going to be a natural part of things. So here's there's an interesting instance here where I was kind of moving the camera around. Don't love all these camera moves, but what I think is interesting here is that you can kind of see how as the camera moves, the exposure is changing. So we've got sort of one exposure here, and then it kind of darkens. So if we wanted to adjust these separately, we could. Let's start by correcting this side, and then we'll make the cut and make our changes to the other side, because we don't need to start from scratch necessarily. So we'll just kind of adjust this here. Add a little bit more. Let's do one for the contrast. So this is kind of what we were looking at before. Okay. But then as we move to this side, you can see that one's quite dark. So if we go back here and we make a cut, maybe somewhere in the transition area here, we make a cut. And we add a little cross dissolve there. And on this side, we can kind of adjust. Actually, let's do an adjustment here. So we'll just adjust the midtones a bit. See if we can get just a little bit more out of this. So this is what we had before. So there we go. So we're just adjusting the midtones a bit, and should, in between these two, we should get, so you can see here, I do think it did a pretty good job of masking that. So without the transition, just delete that transition real quick. Without the transition, I think you can see like it kind of blinks a bit. I feel like 8 frames would be too much, but 6 seems pretty good. And I feel like you don't really notice quite so much the change. So there you go. So if you have a clip where the camera's moving and the exposure changes, you can adjust both sides slightly differently and then add a little cross dissolve in the middle. I think this, we could still tweak this a bit more, make it a little bit smoother, but you get the idea that especially if the camera's moving and you have that cross dissolve, like as the move is happening, it will kind of mask that cross dissolve. And really the only thing that you're dissolving between is that change in exposure. Okay, so that's just a little bit of insight into my process for color grading this footage. So let's take a look at some examples of sort of before and after with the raw footage and then the color graded versions. Thanks for watching, you guys. This has been a really exciting year. Shooting Super 8 film, shooting still photography, just trying to like keep myself going, shooting footage every month. I've had a blast. I feel like I've learned a lot. I've actually shot more stuff than you've seen because I've kind of been shooting and recording and talking and editing and doing things as I go. And so I've actually got some really exciting episodes planned for 2024. So if you like this video, consider subscribing to the channel. This channel, of course, is Critical Crop Top Films, and all the 50 Foot Woman episodes are available in the 50 Foot Woman playlist. I put out new episodes every Wednesday. I am going to be taking a little bit of a break for the holidays. There will be new episodes coming soon. I think it's going to be about a week. So you might see like 1 week getting skipped. You know, I've got 3 kids and the holidays are really crazy for us. So don't get too mad at me if I do like a 2-week skip, but I promise you it won't be any longer than that. I'm having such a good time making these videos and I want to get back to releasing more as soon as I can. And I hope that you're taking a rest and getting a little bit of a break too. In addition to this video series on YouTube, I also have a blog called The 50 Foot Woman on Substack. If you subscribe to the blog on Substack, you get the videos that I'm sharing here on YouTube, but you also get more still photography and photo walks and just sort of my process as I'm learning more about still photography. So if you feel like that's something that you would enjoy, I'm also going to put a link to the Substack below. Hope you guys get a chance to shoot some film during this holiday season. I always enjoy all the excitement, and sometimes we do some traveling, and of course there's always lots of decorations and family events and things, so there's a lot of opportunities to get your camera out. But mostly I hope you're just relaxing and enjoying some time to do maybe some things that you don't get to spend as much time doing during the hectic normal days of the year. Thanks for making this journey so special for me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you back in 2024 when we will all be shooting more film.